Welcome to the AlzAuthors podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, Al's author, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, I'm Susan Landis of AlzAuthors. If you're listening to this podcast, you may be looking for more support on your dementia journey. Please visit our website at AlzAuthors.com, where you'll find hundreds of carefully vetted resources written by caregivers and professionals in Alzheimer's and dementia care. You'll get knowledge, comfort, and support through books, blogs, podcasts, films, and more. That's AlzAuthors.com. Remember, you are not alone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to AlzAuthors Live. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, the author of Blue Hydrangeas, an Alzheimer's love story, and I'm a co-founder and manager of AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. We welcome you to this AlzAuthors Live presentation, Caring for Two Parents with Dementia at the Same Time. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our management team who are with us this morning, and that would be Christy Byrne-Yates, who is here with me. She's my podcast partner and co-moderator for this event, a member of our management team and board of directors. She also manages our YouTube channel, and Christy is a panelist for this event as she too cared for two parents. She's the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. Now I'd like to introduce our panelist. Jean Lee's parents were both diagnosed on the same day with Alzheimer's disease. Through her memoir, Alzheimer's Daughter, readers travel a journey beginning with a World War II romance through aging and first suspicions to finally her parents' last breaths. Jean is a co-founder of AlzAuthors and works as an acquisitions editor, social media manager, board secretary, and a coordinator of the custom caregiver collections. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
Vicky Tapia also cared for both parents. A diary written to help her cope with caregiving morphed into Somebody Stole My Iron, a family memoir of dementia. This memoir is written in a conversational style filled with personal lessons learned along the way, ideas and tips for managing the day-to-day difficulties of dementia, and useful information from experts within the field of Alzheimer's research. Vicky is a co-founder of AlzAuthors and works as an acquisitions editor for children's books, social media manager, and board treasurer. Frank Silverstein is an independent documentary filmmaker based in Hastings-on-Hudson, just north of New York City. He tells his family's story of both parents with dementia in the short documentary, Lousy, Love in the Time of Dementia. He produced the AlzAuthors promotional video on our website and is currently developing several independent productions focused on questions of aging. So thank you all so much for being here. First of all, I was going to start with Christy to tell us a little bit about your journey with your two parents. And I'm going to say, when I first started working with dementia families or patients as a young nurse in long-term care, I had never met anybody who had both parents affected. So when I met Jean Lee and heard her story, I couldn't believe it. That how do you survive something like that? How do you manage? How do you deal with it? How do you care for both of them? And I know in my own case, my mom was instrumental in helping with her husband's care when I was caring for them. So we were kind of like partners. But in this situation, I don't know that you have that partner anymore. So, Christy, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Sure. For me, I was in a lot of denial about my mom. She's the one who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My dad had had a stroke in his early 60s, and it wasn't until probably mid to late 70s that my husband and I started doing a lot of helping with my mom and dad. They lived about 5, 10 minutes up the road. And I think because I was aware that he'd had a stroke and then he'd had a series of TIAs, and then there were other things. And he was diagnosed then eventually with mild cognitive impairment and vascular dementia. And it just manifested a lot differently than, say, Alzheimer's or some other kind. It wasn't short-term memory. It was his ability to really interact in a deeper conversation. He lost a lot of that. Like, conversations were harder for him. He couldn't stay with them. But I was really in denial about my mom because, for all the reasons that people are in denial. I mean, I did not want to see this. And I thought she was just anxious about my dad. And people kept saying to me, no, Christy, you really need to look at this. And so through a series of things that occurred, I finally, and I guess I was upset with myself that I didn't see it, because at the time I was a school psychologist. So I did a lot of cognitive testing with kids and young adults. I mean, understanding how the brain works, memory, learning, all language, all of these things. And I'm like, really, Christy, you missed these signs? And I'm like, well, of course I did, because this was my mom. It's not a student I'm trying to evaluate. Your heart gets in the way. But I finally, once I got to, okay, we've got to look at this, then I kind of went into that, okay, that more of my scientific mind took over, and I started thinking about what to do. So it was just a matter of managing their different symptomology, what was going on with my mom. The scariest thing was my dad was on all kinds of medication, blood pressure, kidney, oh gosh, everything. And my mom kept mixing up his medications in his little medication box, the little pill box, because she thought she was helping him, she was, helping him remember, but she couldn't remember that she was mixing it up. And I'm laughing, but it's like, that was the thing that finally some healthcare professionals were saying, Christy, this is not good. This is not okay. We got to work on this. So those were some of the things. I think eventually the part of my book that I think is what I wanted to share with people was that my parents had made plans for their end of life long before this time. They knew what they wanted. They did not want to end up living with either me or my brother or my sister, because they wanted us to have their own lives. So they socked money away and had a long-term care insurance policy that only paid for assisted living or nursing care, because that's what they wanted. So when the time came, they did move into a facility that managed memory and assisted living. And so I just had to put I had to put their plans into action. So that was the gift of love that they gave me, is that I didn't have to think about that. I just had to do it. And so those are the kinds of things I talk about in my book. But yeah, since writing the book and since joining AlzAuthors, I've learned so much more about memory, dementia, caring for people with dementia. I'm so glad this organization exists because, boy, I could have used it so many times. So, yeah.
Thank you, Christy. Frank, tell us a little bit about your experience.
So both of my parents had dementia. My father began to develop it before my mother. My mother was very sensitive about it and complained about it endlessly. They were living in an adult community for people over 50. They had a house in a area with a bunch of other houses. My brother and I lived well over an hour away from them in different places. They began to sort of lose their ability to navigate things. They couldn't figure out how to operate the coffee maker, and my brother put a big red sticker on the on button so they could know what to press. They were having trouble dialing their phone numbers, so we got a phone that had some buttons that allowed them to automatically dial certain numbers. They couldn't deal with the TVs, and my brother had a way that he could sort of zoom in and change the channels from an hour and a half away for them. They were having trouble with, my father was the one that did all the bill paying and financial stuff. And when he couldn't really handle it, my mother wasn't really able to handle it either. So we had all the bills put on automatic payment through their system. So we sort of we didn't really feel like they had dementia exactly, but they were just sort of not operating so well. And it just got worse and worse. They couldn't make food. And so my brother was going down there every weekend to take care of them. We got an aide to come in for a few hours, and that was woefully inadequate. And there was a moment when I was at their house with my wife, and we had come for lunch, and my mother looked at us and said, "I don't know who you are, but you need to get out of the house right now." And my father said, "This is not, you need to leave." And so we did. And we came back about an hour later, and they were both really upset. And they said, "Where'd you go? What happened to you?" We're like, "You told us to leave." And that was when I realized that this was something that was not tenable. So then we never got a diagnosis for either of them as to what kind of dementia they had. My brother and I had the feeling that it wouldn't make any difference. There's no cure for it, and there's no medicine for it. And so what are we going to do but just do what? So then ultimately my brother, who is single, rented a house near where he lives, and they moved into that house. And my father had a pretty decent pension, and we were able to use that to have some aides come, and ultimately they were live-in aides. Because there were two of them, the finances of having them in a nursing home of some sort were not that different from having an aide come in. And so because he could supervise it, that worked out well for us. And they ended up being able to die in the house with my brother. One of the things that was very helpful for my wife and I is that we joined an Alzheimer's support group, and we got a lot of help from them on how to deal with it. And how, in the end, my wife and my mother were not ever going to get along, and they never did get along, even when everybody was together. So there was never any hope that they were going to come to our house. And as a result, my brother had primary responsibility for taking care of them. And my feeling was I would help my brother as much as I could. And so I would come in and take them to dental appointments and doctor appointments. I would, work out when there were problems. Often he would just call up and say, "Can you figure out how to deal with this?" So that was how it worked out for my brother and I. And I think it worked out pretty well. So I don't know if that is what you needed me to say or you were interested. That's kind of the big picture on it.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Jean, how about you?
And I just want to say my sister's on this call too, Anne, if you give a wave. And so if you think of anything you want to interject, Anne, please do. Both of our parents were diagnosed on the same day with Alzheimer's. And that sounds like such a blow. Like how could you stand up and even take next steps after that? And it was. However, my sister and I'm the hometown daughter. I lived about a mile from them. In Ohio, my sister lives in Florida. My sister had been my constant companion through this. She was my therapist by phone, often came home, stayed very connected to our family. And we had noticed, we had suspicions that something was not right with them for about 6 years before that diagnosis. And my sister, Anne, had encouraged me to keep a journal, which I did. And that became a critical piece of the diagnosis. I was working full-time as a third grade teacher. My sister was working full-time as a school administrator, but she would drop things and come if I needed her to. It was, as Mary Ann said at the beginning, I think one of the most difficult things was that they both tumbled down together. It wasn't as though I could ask Dad, how's Mom today, or how do we support her, or vice versa, ask Mom, how's he doing today? They went through it hand in hand, completely oblivious and in denial that there was anything wrong with them. We lived in a very small town. They were very entrenched in the community, in their church. There were no assisted living facilities in our town. So I had to pursue those maybe 30 minutes away and visit and, find something that would work for them to keep them safe. My father was still driving. It was a huge concern to me that they would injure someone else. My mom started falling, breaking bones. It actually took, once we had the diagnosis, which, as I say, was 6 years after our first suspicions, once we had the diagnosis, it took, I believe, over a year to get them into care at that point, not because things were full and we couldn't get them in, but because they would agree and then backtrack, agree and then backtrack. One of them would say, okay, I'll go. The other one was, no, we're not going. We often felt as though we were pushing a boulder up the hill, would almost get it to the top and it would tumble back over us and we'd start at square one again. I have to say that I am mystified by the idea of self-care because there was none of that for me except going to work every day and managing 29 third graders. I had more predictable outcomes in my classroom than I had with my elderly parents. I would stop every day after work, check on their medications. Had they taken their medications? Mom had forgotten how to put clothes from the washer to the dryer. Dad had always been the cared for guy. So he had no idea how to even put peanut butter on a piece of bread and jelly to feed her. So things just got progressively worse until we moved them. And I believe then we moved them in 2006. My mother died in 2010. So she was in care for 4 years and my dad for 5 years. As Marianne said, you know, in talking about Alzheimer's daughter and writing that, it was in the clean out of the home, in the aftermath of having moved them. They were still alive, but in care. As I was going through the house, which was, they had kept everything, every butter tub lid all mismatched and bags molding in the basement. But in that process, I found a box of letters. They're World War II love letters. And those became the chapter beginnings of Alzheimer's daughter for me. And without really intending to, people have told me I've written an Alzheimer's love story because each chapter begins with the way they were, the love that originally connected them. And then you just see them tumbling down to their last breath. But you see what devotion held them together when they knew each other, that they were connected to one another, but I don't know at the end that they could have said each other's names. A week after my mom died, I was sitting with my dad and he said, where is that woman I admired? And so that's our story.
Thank you so much, Jean. And Vicky, can you share your story?
Yeah. And putting this in context for both Jean and I, it was in the early 2000s when this all started to happen and come apart. And, you know, it's amazing how as human beings we can rationalize things and not see what's right staring us in the face. I'm amazed at how much I just compartmentalized and I didn't want to know. I didn't want someone to say my mom had Alzheimer's disease. But I mean, and it all started with a computer. One of my mom's and dad's nieces gave them her old computer when she got a new one. And we thought, oh, as a family, this will be great. We can correspond through email and, you know, it just didn't work out. I would explain it to my mom. They lived 2 hours away from me. So I'd go down on weekends to see them and explain to her. And she would nod her head, complete understanding, right? No. And I just took her at her head nodding. But when I'd leave and go home, she would call to say, I can't make it work. I can't make it go. So and the next time I went, I put everything on Post-it notes all the way around the screen. That didn't help either. As time went on, my mom and dad were kind of polar opposites as far as my mom being the one who did all the talking, my dad being the one who rarely talked. And so little did I know, I mean, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. My mom was diagnosed with moderate Alzheimer's disease. First of all, I'm like, how did it become moderate? And I didn't even see it when it was just lightweight. It's moderate. And my dad then was diagnosed with Parkinson's related dementia. So they hung in there on their own for a while and 2 hours away from me. It was so nerve-wracking. All I wanted to do was move them closer to me. And I tried many different approaches to that. And nothing seemed to be moving them at all. Then my dad fell on my mom when she was trying to help him get up out of a chair. And she decided to put him in the local nursing home for a 10-day respite care. When she called to tell me about it, I was so shocked that she did something about, you know, I worried about her all the time. She was not getting any sleep and he was very unsteady on his feet. And so I was pretty, I was still surprised she put him in the nursing home. So anyway, the next thing that happened was he fell in the nursing home and broke his hip. And he was not coming home anytime soon. So my mom and dad lived in a condo, 4 different unit condo and next to other condos, of course, but the other 3 tenants were all gone for the winter. So my mom was trying to do all the caretaking of being my mom, shoveling the snow and keeping everything. And she's this like 90-year-old woman trying to do all this hard physical labor. It just, I had nothing I could say or do would convince her. I tried hiring a home health care aide to come into the house. She wouldn't let them in. She stubborn would be a good word for my mom. So eventually she called me and said, I'm ready to move. Boy, did we hop on that. We had everything in place. So and so she had the ability, the power to say what she wanted. I mean, we gave her that opportunity, hoping nothing dire would happen in the meantime. I mean, her squealing her tires down the road to visit my dad at the nursing home, and I'd get calls saying that she was peeling out of the parking lot, leaving patches of rubber, and she would zip through the intersections without even slowing down. I was terrified she was going to kill herself and some other people too. So it was with great relief that she sold their car, and we got them loaded up and we moved them to Billings, where I live, into an assisted living facility. My dad was in memory care. My mom had her own little independent living apartment. And, I watched the decline and did what I could. I had a sibling who was not particularly interested in being involved. Well, he wasn't at all interested in being involved. There was not much written back in those days like there is today. There weren't many support groups online or not online. They're just, all I had was my computer and my fingers. So I just started writing everything down as we continued on our journey. Just as it was a release for me. It was a way to cope. It was a way to get through the whole frightening experience. I understand them not wanting to move. I really do. As the time has gone on now, it's been 15, 16 years since they both passed away, a year and a day of each other. But I don't want to move either. And I'm kind of getting old, and I have a Parkinson's diagnosis for 2 years now. So I'm thinking about my dad and his Parkinson's related dementia, and reading about dementia every single day and thinking, I don't even want to go there. But I think if people have a sounding board like Jean had her sister, and if you have somebody, you can only unload so much on one person. But I had a very understanding husband who let me talk a lot, and good friends. Still, it's a rocky road when, like Jean, I think all of us have said, you can't go to the other parent and say, what do you think mom would have liked us to do? Or you can't. It's like losing them both at the same time, only they're still there. They just can't understand I mean, mom would take me in her kitchen and she pulled out this utensil out of the drawer and she was like, why do I have this? What do you use it for? I was like, well, it's your egg beater, but I mean, maybe you forgot what it was for. Honestly, I'm so happy to see organizations such as AlzAuthors today, where you can get support and find out information, and there's so much more written information now. I do hope it is an easier journey than those of us that have already been on it 15 years ago had. Yeah. And believe me, even though Jean said she was unfamiliar with self-care or something like that, it's really, when you've got 2 of them, when do you have time for self-care? I don't know how you do that. You just put one foot in front of the other and you just keep going on. That's the only choice, really. Yeah. Oh, unless you're a non-compliant sibling who just says, yeah, I'd rather remember them the way they were. You take care of it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Vicki. Several of you have said how you documented your experience, either with journaling or some type of writing. And I know in Frank's case, he did a lot of recording because he works in the television and film world. Can you talk a little bit about how that might have helped you and how it helped you create your book or your film? Frank, did you want to start?
Sure. When things started really falling apart with my folks, just took out my cell phone and I tape recorded things that were going on. I didn't really intend to make a film particularly. I was really just documenting for myself of what's happening. It wasn't until they were very, very advanced that I even began to think about making a film. The most painful part of the process of the both of them having dementia was early on when they lost their ability to navigate. And that was when the parents that I knew stopped being the parents that I knew. Late in their process, when they were really helpless, was much more of a kind of mopping up operation, keeping them clean, keeping them fed, keeping the house going. There was no longer a sense of, what we'd lost with them because they really were gone. The film, it was a kind of a reality check a little bit for me. Often I thought what the things I documented were kind of hilarious. Things that they would say and do. And, my father announced that he was taking 2 years and going to go to New Zealand. And no, my mom wasn't coming with him. And, just like, where did that come from? Or my mother would start singing along with Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett. And it was sometimes the lyrics were not quite the same. And she would sort of go off into her own similar lyrics. So there were things like that I was filming that I just thought, this is just too weird. And it was a record for me of like, okay, this is where we're at. And in terms of organizing it and putting it together into a piece, it was horrible. I looked at all this footage and I couldn't look at it. I mean, I would cry. I would watch it for a little bit. And I'm the kind of stuff I did for television as a producer. I mean, I worked with all sorts of horrible crime stories. I had a very tough skin for seeing really awful parts of people's lives, but they were never my own. And so it was a very different experience. So it took me a long time to organize that and to be able to look at it in any kind of objective way and to make something out of it. I felt like it was my goal was that maybe other people could take advantage of my experience, that they could see things in somebody else's experience that would resonate for them. And I was really annoyed with the way that people with dementia are portrayed in the media as being goofy old people. And it's not that at all. And it's really much more complicated. And so I tried to do something that was to present their experience the way it really is. And it's not easy to watch, as anybody that's gone through this knows. The two of them, because they were different sorts of dementias, their dealing with them was different. My dad kind of accepted it and he went rolling along. He had been an academic. He was a university professor. He'd be interviewed by the BBC or other television. And once he stopped being able to manage that, he was like, I'm not doing that anymore. My mother was kind of the person who kept everything going, and she was very aware that she was no longer able to manage stuff, and it was pissing her off, and she was very angry and very upset, and she would not let go of anything. So some of that I saw when I looked at the film. And what was the most compelling thing to me about making the film, and I think the most meaningful, is that I saw those fundamental features about my parents. That my father, he was, I mean, he was an ambitious person. He had a lot of responsibility, but he always used to say, I mean, don't never look back. You make a mistake, just keep going and go forward. And my mother would never let go of anything. And so even in their dementia, even when they didn't know who my brother and I were or where they were or what was going on, there was some core fundamental personality about them that was there and stayed with them till the very end. And I don't know that I would have seen that if I hadn't filmed them, because it wasn't until I kind of looked at them and listened to them that I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, they were falling apart. Yeah, they didn't know what half of what was going on, but there was something about their personality that was there. And the last thing I would say is that my father used to say about people with dementia, if I ever get like that, just shoot me. And I have heard endless number of people say that to me. And they said it to me when we were struggling with taking care of them, of like, why don't you just, let something happen and, their lives are over, really. And I would say that in the course of documenting their experience, there was never that moment of like, okay, right, okay, sure, let's just give them an opportunity to die. And it's like, well, when would that be? Is that today? Because actually dad's going to have a ice cream soda that he's been looking forward to, and then he's going to have an apple pie after that, and he's really looking forward to that. And like, maybe this is not the day that he needs to stop living. And maybe it's tomorrow. And so I guess seeing what they could still enjoy, what they could still participate in, and even though it was really minimal and not what we would think of as meaningful in the way that professional people think of their lives as being meaningful, it was meaningful. And so I think in the course of documenting, I could see I could see that about them.
That's pretty profound. Thank you so much.
And Frank, I want to jump in on that because I think you bring up something that I hear stuff like that a lot too, right? And at the same time that I was caring for my parents, I was also raising my kids. I had two children living at home still. My daughter was in middle school, really, and my son was late middle school, starting high school. So I'm still raising kids, and I became acutely aware that my children were seeing how I was caring for my parents, and they adored my parents. They had been their favorite babysitters for so long, they loved both sets of grandparents very much, and my mom and my daughter had a very special relationship. So I had to be aware of what am I showing my kids about life and death and compassion and empathy. But what you're saying too, like your point about, well, but dad's looking forward to this, ice cream and pie. And I'll hear people say, well, don't worry about that. I mean, they're not going to remember anyway. And my thing is, they won't remember, but I will.
And your
I have a
kids will.
memory. My kids will have a memory of doing something with my parents and being with them. And this is the part where I get choked up because I think about how beautiful my children were with my parents. Even, and my parents died 7 weeks apart. And my daughter was there the night before my mother died. We gathered with her. We had no idea it was her last night. And both my parents had comorbid medical issues that were really the end of their lives. It wasn't from the Alzheimer's or the vascular, but I suppose my dad's was from his vascular dementia. But it's just so it's so important to remember, even if they don't remember 5 minutes from now, they're going to experience something with you. And so being able to be fully present to them and compassionate, and that's where that I found it very hard to at the assisted living. They were encouraging me not to tell my mother my dad had died, and I'm like, I think she's going to notice. She wasn't that far along. I mean, but you know, we sometimes have to say, yeah, 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 sure, yeah, agree with them because they're telling you something that is not true. But why argue? Like, what's the point? And yet some people still do argue. And it's all these things that I didn't know. And eventually I just let my heart lead it. But I really appreciated what you just said. And I do feel like it's important, I guess, for anyone watching this later, is you're going to have those memories. And how do you want those to be? And your children will have those memories. And they're precious. And so it's fleeting. Make the most of them,
Mm,
Yeah.
thank you.
In fact, one of the things that my brother said early on to me was, "This is who we are. We are taking care of them." And there were things that I couldn't do, and he couldn't do. And this is who we are. And you're absolutely right. It's like this: you define yourself, and you define yourself to your kids and to your neighbors and to everybody, that this is the way we treat our family members.
Mm. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Jean, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think the question went back to journaling or documenting, and I would not have done that without Anne's prompting. And my journal was basically started out to be blood pressures and weights every time I took them to the doctor. And then it was my way of communicating with Anne. I'd call her on the phone, I'd open up the journal, I'd read to her what I'd written. But it did end up to be key in their diagnosis. The social worker at the geriatrician's office poured through that and could see a definite progression and failing in them, in the minutia that I never would have mentioned in an appointment. So it became very key in their diagnosis. How did it? I knew I had something there in that journal that I wanted to convey to our families, to our children, to Anne's two children, my two children, about our family history as far as it related to Alzheimer's disease. So I began to put it together just in that way for family. And then I decided, well, I really wanted to write it as best as I could for family. So I joined a local writing group. They got a hold of it and they said, Jean, this just has so much more scope than your own children. You've got to publish it. And something we've not really spoken about here is the guilt in doing that. I felt such guilt in releasing this because our parents were very peaceful and such private people. But through my journey, well, as a teacher, I read to learn. And sustaining me through my own journey was Marianne and Vicky. I had read their books, never met them, but in the early days of e-readers, I had found them as people who were willing to share an experience. They sustained me, and I thought, okay, their books helped me. I guess I will push the publish button. And with great guilt, I did, to the point, in fact, that it took me 4 years to write it and get it all fleshed out correctly. And as I sat pushing that last final publish button, I'm not kidding, I felt as though lightning would come down and strike me and I would be dead on the floor. And that guilt remained with me for a long time. Reviews would start coming in, and I would almost shield, like, oh no, they're going to say terrible things about, how could you say all these terrible things about your parents? And I finally sent my book to Marianne. Didn't know her. And she read it. She said, I needed validity, that it was something better than just being a guilt thing. And she said, will you help me gather and find these books for other caregivers? And we brought Vicki in at that point. And those reviews that have come to Alzheimer's Daughter through the publication and through AlzAuthors, the work we've done, those have healed me. So I think for caregivers, we do it, the community of talking to others heals us. And, it's such a private journey. And so many of us keep it just to ourselves, never say anything about it. And we can't really heal until we do heal with others, I think.
Thank you, Jean. Vicki, did you want to add anything?
There are so many parallels in the journey that Jean and I have both taken with our parents. I could say ditto. I really struggled with the notion of publishing my book, and close friends knew I'd been journaling, and I realized after a year or two I probably was writing a book, but there's writing the book and then there's putting the book out there for other people to see, two very different things there. So it got put away in my drawer for about 3 years. I didn't do anything with the manuscript. This is why it took 9 years for it to be published. It took about 4 years to write it, 3 years of sitting there. And enough of my friends, there was probably 3 or 4 friends that said, why are you keeping this from everyone? It could help people. And they convinced me maybe it could. So I moved forward with the publication, and I have not regretted it. I think that it's opened doors for me. I feel the same as Jean, as far as the healing process of going through what we went through has made a huge difference in my life. I feel like I can let go of it, and I can share my story if it will in turn help someone else make it through their journey. Then I've accomplished everything I set out to do when I decided to publish it.
Well, I'm so glad you did.
Well, thank you, Marianne. Me too. If I hadn't done that, I'm not sure I would be feeling there's a peacefulness that comes when you put it forth and it germinates and helps other people can find information that helps them. Then, there's no better feeling, really.
Right.
Yeah.
It's cathartic. That's what people say.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah. It's cathartic.
And
Mhm.
cathartic. And I think too, I heard in different ways, each of you saying, looking for information at the time that you were going through this, and there wasn't as much, right? And now I really resonate with what you said, Jean. What you got back in reviews is very healing. And I would say that's what's been so amazing to me, is when people say, wow, reading your book, I felt like I was talking to somebody who really understood what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And that's like, I'm not your physician. I'm not going to tell you this is what you need to do. I'm not going to tell you this is how you handle this. I'm just talking about real feelings and real stuff that happened. And that's what people need, because it's hard to go through this. It's hard to watch people you care about struggle. And as I said, my parents also had some comorbid health things. My dad was just in so much pain at the end of his life, and that was really hard to see. And I didn't know of this term, but I have since learned the term anticipatory grief. And it's that grief you feel before someone's even gone, before someone's even died. It's that grief that you feel watching them lose abilities, lose function that they used to have, to see them in pain, to see them struggle. And that was kind of something that I also wanted to share with people. Like, this, what you're feeling, all these emotions you're feeling are normal and natural. There's nothing wrong with you that you think you're going crazy, because it is a crazy making situation. So, yeah.
I would add that because you're talking about guilt, and I would say that because of the nature of dementia, which is a mental problem, there's all sorts of weird guilt that comes up with the way that your parents are responding to you and to each other and the world. And you feel like, is this the real person that they speak in, they use foul language that they never used, and they talk about things in ways that they never spoke about. And it's like, is that who they really are? And I never understood them. My parents at one point had a bitter argument over nothing, but it was vicious. And I filmed it. And a friend of mine who was taking care of his parents saw the film, and he said, my parents were very loving their whole lives, and they did the same thing that your parents did. And I thought, oh, they really hated each other and they were concealing it. But I realized it was the dementia that I was witnessing, and not some genuine weirdness between them. And I think that by sharing these really awful things that you would normally never, ever want to tell another soul, that my mother did this, my father said that. It's like, these are embarrassing, horrible things because their minds are sort of all stretched out and perverted. And so when you see and hear other people's parents doing basically the same stuff that your parents are doing, I think it's not just like, oh, they need to get chemotherapy and that's dreadful, which it is dreadful, but they're things that you would bear to yourself as being horrible. You realize by sharing it with everyone, it's like, oh, this is part of what this thing is.
Mhm.
So that's another I don't know.
So I just want to say that Paulette wanted to know where she can find your film.
Oh, so there's an it's distributed by Terra Nova Films, TerraNova Films, and you can find it online. terranova.org, I think, is their email. And the film is called Lousy: Love in the Time of Dementia. And I'll say something funny about that too, because originally I titled the film just Lousy. And that was because it was something that a word my mother used frequently. And when I was distributing the film for film festivals, it got turned down in a number of places. And part of the reason I discovered was because nobody wants to go see a film called Lousy. It just sounds awful, and who would want to subject themselves to that? And it was my wife who came up with the idea of subtitling it Lousy: Love in the Time of Dementia. My parents were very much in with each other till they died a week apart from each other, actually. But once I rebranded it, so to speak, and people could see that there was something positive in there, which there isn't a lot. It made it a little bit more palatable to people, and that's like also part of I would say, baloney that sometimes surrounds the talk about dementia.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have a question for our panelists? Paulette, you have another one?
I don't know if it's a question so much as just an observation that siblings have come up a lot in conversation today. And I am the oldest of three. My dad is in assisted living. He's 93, and I'm his major caregiver. I live an hour and a half drive away from where he is. My brother and sister live 10 minutes away from where he is, but I do everything. They're willing to help, but I have to anticipate what's needed. I have to give them an assignment. And so I don't know if this is just the way it goes when you're the oldest or why and I'm also probably the most organized. And so I anticipate what needs to be done. But I'd just like to know, I know, Vicki, you didn't get any help at all from your sibling. And Jean, you got a lot of help from yours. So I know it varies, but it's just, I don't really have a question. It's just more of a comment that I think that this is something that comes up. There's more to caregiving than just the tasks that somebody can drop in and do. There's big picture caregiving too. And I happen to be the go-to person for that. And it's hard when you
Lucky
live.
for your dad.
Pardon?
Lucky for your dad.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Paulette's book that she wrote is such a beautiful, beautiful children's book.
It is.
Paulette, that brings such
Oh.
healing to so many families.
Thank you.
It is
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Christy, you had something to say?
Paulette, I wanted to tell Paulette, one of one of the first things I did when I started caring for my parents, started being there to do things to help them, was I took a class at my local community college, and it was around, it was in gerontology, and it was about just the whole social service network or whatever. And a gentleman came to talk to the class, and he was the executive director of a large assisted living in the area, and he said, the oldest daughter, that's
Yeah.
the one I want to talk to. And I thought, dang it.
Yeah,
Because
right.
I am the oldest daughter.
Yes.
But my sister, I'm in Sacramento, California. My sister was in Montana. My brother was in Michigan. So they couldn't do the day to day. And it was just going to be me. But I was up to the task. It was just, I did navigate with them, and I was on good terms with both my brother and sister, but they weren't going to be able to drop everything and come see me. You know, my sister had young kids at the time. But what I said to them, I set very clear boundaries with them. I said, look, I'm going to do this, and I will keep you informed about everything. I want to be able to call you when I need to vent, or I need to cry, or I need to talk through something. But what I also need to know that you're not going to call me and second guess everything I do.
Yes, that's important.
I don't
And-
need a
yeah.
backseat driver right now. I need your trust.
Mhm.
Can you give that to me? I just asked them. I said, can you give that to me? I wasn't demanding it. I was asking for it. And they both said yes. And because of that, we could move forward, you know, and I feel like I work with a lot of caregivers now, and the family stuff is real. And the other thing that's really real is all of us talking. It sounds like we all really liked our parents and loved them. And there are also people out there caring for parents with whom they had a very horrible relationship. They may have had a parent who was abusive, or who was neglectful, or who wasn't nice. And so that changes things a lot too. And then there are people who really have siblings who, don't want to do anything, or shouldn't do anything. Maybe they're a problem. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of dynamics. So I think that's my other thing about this, is in talking about it, because I really do feel, Eugene, on how hard it is, and the guilt, and laying out my family's stuff, you know, and I was very particular about what I shared. I will be honest with that. But, you know, we don't solve problems by keeping them under wraps. We have to talk about them, you know, and that's part of healing too, is like the next generation. If we don't tell them the real stuff we were going through, they're just going to go through it too. And they're not going to have a roadmap. And I just kind of feel like, I hope that all of these books in AlzAuthors, and all of these podcasts and films and things help people start to talk about things we've never talked about before. So anyway,
Thank you.
I could go on and on and on, and I don't want to, so I'm going to turn it back over to Mary.
Thank you. Joan, I thought I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
No, I'm an ombudsman, and I took care for I didn't physically take care of her, but I was her power of attorney. 15 years. Part of it was stroke, dementia. She then became aphasic. And I'm just, my ex-husband, who's older than I, is now exhibiting signs of dementia. And I want to be prepared. I don't, they asked him to go for an Alzheimer's test and he refused. He doesn't want to be placed in a caregiving situation. My daughter is living with him to keep an eye on him and help him. But I kind of feel like I'm blessed to be a person that can handle what I need to do and make decisions. But all of your testimonies have just been heartbreaking, because siblings and family members, when they don't know how to deal with life with this individual, they don't participate, and that was hurtful to me. I have a brother who is still not participating, and I just really think that anyone who has taken on the I don't know what it is, the responsibility of caring for another human being, and they are your parents, but I'm also looking at others in my family and others in this long-term care that I go to, seeing the decline of an individual and knowing that somewhere in that hidden brain is a lot of stories that could be shared. And Frank, I'm going to watch your video. I think that all of you have contributed a great deal to my day. I'm so glad I joined in, and thank you for allowing me to participate.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Joan.
Did anybody else have a question or comment? No. Okay. Kind of came to the end of our time. So I just want to thank you all for attending, caring for two parents with dementia at the same time. Our next AlzAuthors Live presentation will be on February 18th. We're already planning into the new year as we discuss the long haul when caregiving lasts more than 10 years. And that will also feature Jean Lee, as well as Ann Campanella, another member of our team, and Loretta Woodward-Vini, whom you may be familiar with as the Lego Lady. In the meantime, please check out our podcast and YouTube channel for replays of previous panel discussions. We've done several on various topics. Book club meetings. If you didn't know, we do have a book club with Aging and Amazing. We meet monthly and talk about one of the books and meet the author. And we also have interviews with our authors, telling their stories and offering helpful tips and advice for caregiver journeys. Visit that at AlzAuthors.com. Please check your inbox each week for news from AlzAuthors. Actually, we're doing bi-monthly emails from AlzAuthors, introducing our newest author, podcast, special events, and more. We are a 501c3 organization supported by donations only. So if you would like to contribute to our mission to provide quality resources for dementia caregivers, please visit alzauthors.com/donate. You can find us on social media at Facebook, X, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey daily. Please follow us. And remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an AlzAuthors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on AlzAuthors, please visit AlzAuthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to AlzAuthors@gmail.com.
We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
I'm Vicki Tapia from AlzAuthors. If you enjoy the podcast, you'll enjoy reading more of our authors' stories in one of our anthologies, Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregiving Stories. Each volume offers a wealth of information and a preview of each title to help you pick the perfect resource. You'll find them on our free resources page at AlzAuthors.com with a variety of caregiver tip sheets. So after the podcast, take a few minutes to check it out. Remember, you are not alone.